You like that little bumper video I just made? Little intro video with our logo because I was bored and looking for something to do. And when we had our guest just notify us that she wasn't going to be able to be here, I was like, well, I've got a little time then to make a little intro video. So anyway, that's what I just created. I kind of like it. Jesse, what's up, my man? How you doing?
Hey, Joe. I did like that a lot, actually. Very cool. Very cool. I want to welcome all our viewers to the Solution Point Plus live stream episode that we do for Facebook and YouTube every week. Thanks for tuning in. I think we're over 100 subscribers on YouTube. We haven't been around that long, and we're quickly approaching 1,000 followers on Facebook. So I know Joe's goal is 8 million. So we got a little work to do, but we're getting there. First, I want to say is happy birthday, America. So happy 4th of July, everyone. Happy Independence Day, celebrating our wonderful country. Hope you're doing so safely according to all guidance that's out there. Keeping in mind that we still have COVID-19 everywhere lingering. One thing that we probably should be doing, and I know we've done it through posts, but specifically, I think we should be saying is everything that we talk about today is our own views and opinions. Everything on our social media is our own views and opinions. Doesn't represent any government organization or any employer that we've worked with. And even the guests we have on, their opinions are their own. So I wanted to get that out of the way. We are sad to say, for numerous reasons, that we kind of have to pivot what we're going to talk about today. We had a really, really cool show planned. Joe was excited. I was excited because she is a rock star in our world, what we talk about. So Karen Solomon, she runs Blue Help. So a lot of people realize and know this, if a law enforcement officer falls in the line of duty, they're memorialized. There's several ways, but the most specific way is the National Memorial in Washington, D.C. And there's actually like a site run in conjunction with that'll talk about every officer that's fallen. But one of the biggest mysteries and kind of taboo things, sadly, is officer suicides. And that's what Karen's organization does. So she does a remembrance and like a count and kind of follows. Last night, tragically, somewhere in America, a police officer lost her life. So we don't have her today. So we're just going to talk about this subject specifically and hope that she can come back on the show another time. I think Joe has more details because he actually spoke with her earlier today.
Yeah, so we're trying to line up next week. And so when I was talking to Jesse, I said, hey, let's kind of keep this in the same lane. Back in the day when we had our podcast, short-lived podcast that brought us great joy. We did an episode on suicide, and it had the largest reach. It had the most feedback, and people really enjoyed it. And so I said, well, again, the whole purpose of Blue Help and what they do and what Karen and her team do is they try and accurately collect information on law enforcement suicide specific. And why it's important is it's hard to address a problem when you don't understand the problem. And I think, from a federal support level, from a state level, from a community level, from an agency level, no matter how far you want to break it down, it's important that we first accept the fact that there's an issue. And last year really, really pointed to that. And so I'm proud that, I met Karen at a suicide symposium at NYPD last year. And so I've been following the work she's been doing. I've been quoting her statistics like many other agencies across the country. And she's just a wonderful, wonderful human being. And so I was super excited that she was going to be here. And then she was like, hey, got caught up. I'm in New Hampshire. Terrible service. Can we push it back later in the day? To which I said, at some point, I've got to go celebrate life. And we had plans already. And so we're not going to be able to do it later. We're keeping at our 1 o'clock for this week, obviously. And then I am going to try and get her back next Saturday. So that's the hope for now. And it'll kind of, what we're going to talk about today is really, it's going to essentially lead up to next week. And that's what we're looking to do. And again, like Jesse mentioned, that podcast we did on suicide, we talked in that episode about doing another episode specific to first responder suicide, something that that affects both of us very deeply, but we never had the chance to do that. And so I think between the end of today's show and next week, that's essentially what we're going to do. but from a broader picture, especially with, again, think back, like I posted this the other day, but July 1st was officially halfway through the year of 2020. It's been a dismal year. 2020 has been a disaster on many fronts, but we're halfway through it. And so the silver lining, the optimist in me is like, yay, it's almost over. And then I was telling a friend, like, but that assumes that 2021 is going to be better. So I'm hopeful. I just don't know what that's going to look like. But anyway, we wanted to talk specifically about mental health and wellness, which is our bread and butter. This is obviously what we do, but specific to the point of suicide and how people get to that point. I actually had someone reach out to me on Facebook talking about this, and not even in America. And she's asking me, like, what would you do if you knew a loved one was suffering, and how would you handle this? And so, it's so interesting how we have these arbitrary borders or boundaries that kind of keep us from thinking that somehow people are different in other areas. And what I would say is that one of the great equalizers in the world is that all human beings, for the most part, are made up of the same parts. And we all have the same infrastructure. We all have a brain, and we all have a mind, and we all have a heart, and we all have all these things. And so really, when it comes to helping somebody, it's not that different, and that's why we're able to help people, not just here in Texas or in the United States, but globally. We can offer some type of feedback, input, advice, whatever it is, because again, at the end of the day, we're talking about people dealing with people and leveraging that experience that we have to get there. So.
Yeah, so a lot of people have focused on us and how we got started, where we came from, where all this attention, came to Joe and our organization, how that happened. Everyone thinks about a better way to do policing involving people in crisis, jail diversion, things like that, handling complex social issues that are kind of been given to police to deal with. But beyond that, most people don't realize or think about is this subject has been kind of the most important aspect of our mission and what we do. We often get asked about it, but it's usually like in a very private matter, right? We'll get a Facebook message or somebody will text, hey, can we talk offline? And you'd be surprised at the spectrum of people that this affects across, all ranks, across family dynamics. It really does affect everyone, and that's why it's so important to us. And in order to bring this subject forward, I think it's an important question to start with is, why is this a thing? Like, why do people choose to take their life? Why do people resort to this? What happens? And there's several factors, but I think if we dive into that, we can start getting into the complexity and the nuances of the issue. And I think people have a better understanding. So I think, Joe, if we could start with that, why do people, how does this happen?
Yeah, and hello to Toby. And what I would ask is, especially for this episode, I know we always say that, and we don't have a ton of viewers on the live because everyone's out doing their thing. So thank you for the ones that are there. But if there's anything that you have or a question, please just throw it in there, because again, this video lives on forever. And so it might be a question that someone else has. But the question of why, which for me is one of the most powerful questions that anyone can ask, because I think anytime we really make the effort to obtain a deeper understanding of any issue, it just makes us smarter about it. It makes us better. It makes us better able to respond or help. And so what again, understand that our expertise comes from doing this for a very long time in real world environments. It's we've been on the front lines of helping people in their worst moments for over a decade. And so this is where obviously, Solution Point Plus was born out of, was, hey, there's a greater need. How can we serve other people in other areas? And it was based on the experience that we've obtained over the years. But, what I've noticed over the last 11 years or so of people who get to that place of wanting to end their life, which, understand, first of all, goes against everything that is innate within us. Like, the human being is absolutely has a desire to live. There's self-preservation is a real thing. And so when someone gets to that point of contemplation, and again, this from personal experience, not just lived professional experience, but I had my first suicidal thought at 15 years old. Again, everything in life growing up wasn't ideal, and I really struggled with that. And so then navigating through life and then having friends kill themselves in the Marine Corps and then friends on the police department do it. And it's like you're surrounded by it. And really all it does is it desensitizes you to it. So people who don't have that experience, who they don't have loved ones, or they haven't seen death on the other side of suicide, it still remains a bit of a mystery to them. And this is why first responders, doctors, nurses, fire, EMS, police are at greater risk, because once you've seen it, especially once you've seen it time and time again, you become desensitized for one. But the second thing is you really it removes the mystery. It removes I wonder what happens if. And I'll be honest, and I've said this in the film as well, but seeing somebody who takes their own life without doing it in a gory type way, if they don't shoot their face or shoot their head or something extremely dramatic, in knowing them personally and seeing their struggle, it's like this eerie sense of like calm, of like, oh, well, that doesn't look so bad. And then when you get into a very dark space and you're struggling mightily over something, your brain remembers like, oh, but remember when you've seen it completed in this person or this person, and it just looked peaceful almost. And so it becomes very, very dangerous when you have these experiences multiplied over years. But one of the biggest reasons why people don't seek help is because of the stigma that exists globally, especially in this country. We have done a terrible job of defining words like courage and strength and being tough, and all of these words that have, in my opinion, a dangerous connotation to them, because people who feel mentally unstable or soft or weak, even if it's temporary, will fight hard to not let anyone else see them or coming into that world. And I just struggle so much with the fact that people would rather end their life than say, I need help. Like, think about that. That's essentially what it comes down to. It's that simple. People who have killed themselves and people that will kill themselves, they get to that space and there's a moment before they do it of, I'm either going to make this choice knowing it's a final choice, or I'm going to ask for help. And how often it ends with I'm going to make this choice because I don't want to burden my loved ones, because I don't want to appear or seem weak or soft or unable to do my job or unable to lead my family or unable to be a husband or a wife or a spouse or a mother or a father or son or a daughter, whatever. And I don't want to face the shame, the embarrassment, the consequence that is a story more often than not that I've created, not based on reality, but based on the fear that I have fully embodied because of what I believe and see around me. And so I would just rather not put it out there. And then making that ultimate decision, and it's like we say in the world of suicide prevention and assessments is, we understand that it's a permanent solution to a temporary problem. And that's not to minimize anybody's struggle. But what we know is through the history of the world is if we just wait, things do change. And I think that's important to understand now more than ever.
Yeah, excellent choice of words, Joe. So thanks for Toby. Thanks for Susan. Great supporters of us always on our social media supporting us. We thank you guys. Hope you guys have a fantastic Independence Day. Something we talk about, Joe, is, and I talked about this in the on Truly Mental, and then I talked about it I talk about it in our trainings. So for me, it's something very personal, right? Joe and I both have diagnoses of mental health, right? We've struggled with things our whole lives. We know people that have struggled. And Joe talks about people reaching out for help. And that's a very, very, sometimes that's not as clear as we'd like it to be. And Joe talks about how unfair that is, and I'll let him. But I have two examples why this affects me, right? So when I was a teenager in high school, I had a cousin that was very close to me, Mitzi Wise, and she and I were, you know, next door neighbors, and we lived across the street from each other, and we grew up together. And I noticed something about her is she would, whenever it was just her and I, she would ask me questions that at the time I was ignorant to. I was extremely ignorant. And she would often talk about things like, "Hey, have you ever wondered if you like died, if anyone could come to your funeral?" And I would be like, "No." And I just keep playing, writing Yoshi on Super NES, or playing Mario Kart with her. Or she'd be like, "I wonder what happens when we die." Or she'd hear the song "Creep" by Radiohead, and she would say how such an awesome song it was, and she'd listen to it over and over again. Um, do you think people would miss me if I disappeared? I was too young and too ignorant to know that. Um, when I came back from boot camp in the Marine Corps, she ended up taking her life. Um, Years later, fast forward, this is a very personal story to me, and I told it on Truly Mental. My sister passed away from a car accident August of last year, so we're just about under a year. And before this car accident that took her life, she was struggling, and she posted something on social media. It was a Facebook post, and it said something like, it was alluding to the fact that life was so hard, so many things bad are happening. Um, she can see why people give up. So people were posting on there like, "Oh, it's going to be okay. Keep your head up. Love emoji. We're praying for you." But when I read that, I was having dinner with my family, and knowing what Joe and I know now, knowing what Joe and I do now, it hit me. Now, I'll say all day long, right? Joe and I aren't therapists. Like, we don't provide therapy, but we have a very particular skill set. And I think crisis intervention is its own skill set. It's its own thing. And I would argue that I've met therapists that aren't necessarily good at it. It's a very different world when you have somebody on your couch and they're just talking to you about their problems, whether they're being in an environment when something bad is happening, which Joe and I have done for hundreds of hours. But I immediately reached out to her, and I talked to her, and she admitted that she was struggling with suicide. She hadn't been sleeping. She felt she was worthless. She felt hopeless. She felt that that she was failing her children. And we got her help that night. My mom drove her to the hospital. She was in crisis. She got a medication. She saw a therapist. She got some social services, and her life turned around, right? She had a new perspective on things. She was practicing gratitude. She was totally different. She was happy. And then we lost her. But I like how Joe teaches and describes how when people reach out for help, it isn't very fair to the rest of us. I like how you talk about that, Joe.
Sorry, buddy. I'm not going to lie. What do you mean it's not fair to the rest of us? But before you answer that, because I'm confused, but this is what I love about live is I agree with Tommy's point. And when I teach this to first responders, because one of the classes that I do teach is suicide prevention, awareness, assessments. But what he says is I would say if you make the leap to get help, you're actually stronger, not weaker, because it takes a strong person to reach out for help, in my opinion. Wholeheartedly agree. When I teach resiliency and wellness as part of my pillars of self-care that I've been teaching to first responders this year, I define the word resilient. And in there is the word toughness in the definition. And I say, I hate the fact that that word is in the definition because especially first responders, they believe that staying quiet or suppressing their emotions or compartmentalizing their struggles makes them tough. It makes them resilient. And it's actually the complete opposite. And so I really explain that out and I flesh it out to them. And again, I've had incredible success with that class this year to where it's become one of my favorite things to teach because of the amount of people that I've gotten help, the amount of people I've got plugged into services just from me being up there teaching something with story, with example. And again, it just emotionally kind of opens them up a bit to this idea of, yeah, maybe I do need help. But anyway, Jesse, I'm sorry, I'm confused, but explain what you're wanting me to talk about.
No worries. But so one of the best examples of this is in the first episode of 13 Reasons Why. I don't really like where the direction that show went, but I remember the first season was kind of phenomenal. And people will ask for help in a very vague way or in a very light way. And if you don't pick up on it, they will validate that as it's time for me to die or nobody cares. So I've heard you teach it before, Joe. You often talk about it, and I think you even bring the San Francisco bridge in an example. But that isn't fair to the rest of us, right? So because we don't pick up on that vague, nuanced cry for help, we miss it, and that person is solidified in their decision to die.
Yeah. No. Okay. Now I gotcha. Thanks. So to that point, and I do use the Kevin Hines story, who is one of the survivors that's jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge, and I bring that into the training, and I met him, and I got to speak with him. But beyond that, just again in my experience, what I've known of doing thousands of suicide assessments on people is oftentimes because it's difficult to ask for help for a lot of people. It's very hard. And again, I argue it's hard because it's something that hasn't been taught, right? It's like, how should we have an expectation that someone's going to ask for help if we've never taught them how to ask for help? And you might think it's very simple, but if you've never done it, especially when you've actually needed it, I would ask, try it. Because it is very difficult, because again, the fear is like, what are they going to think about me? What does this communicate about me if I'm asking for help? But the point is, and I use the this metaphor of like, people will raise their flag, right? They have the word help written on a flag, and when you're talking with them, they start raising their flag a little bit, and as soon as it comes up, if you don't grab it, if you don't see it the moment it's up, they quickly lower it, and then they think, see, I tried to ask for help and no one cares. But the problem is their way of asking for help was saying something very, very elusive. It was something like, I'm just tired. And if you don't know, if you're not trained in like what to look for, what to listen for, it's very easy to dismiss that and be like, yeah, I'm not sleeping well either. Things have been pretty intense, and you're just having conversation. But that was their effort of telling you like, no, I'm tired of everything. I'm tired of life. Like, I'm going to end my life. But it's not fair to you that you didn't pick that up, because again, you haven't been trained in how to do the assessment. And so on both ends, it's like, we have to be willing to understand this is the value of education. This is the value of training. This is why I'm so passionate about saying we have to introduce mental health basics into every public school in this country. And I don't think just once, and I don't think it should be elective. I've been preaching this for years about like, hey, how can we make things better? It starts in the schools. Everything, period. Like, how do we undo the civil unrest that we're facing right now? How do we start with the youth? Because why? Kids are actually open to listening. Kids are actually open to learning. So many adults are stuck in their just like, I choose to be so far one way or another, and there's nothing you can say or do. There's no data matters, no science matters. It doesn't matter what you say. I'm gonna just stay angry, and that's what I'm gonna do. And it's like, okay, that's your right. You are free to do that. But my hope is that if we were able to introduce these concepts into children and teach mental health basics, again, not just once, I think it should be every other year. And I think it should be normalized, and it should be a part of the curriculum. That way, when kids are getting older, they can start to realize or see like, hey, it's actually very normal to just be like, oh, Jesse, you look upset today. Like, is everything okay at home? No, Joe, it's not. My parents are going through a divorce and I'm really sad, and I'm struggling with it because I'm not really sleeping well. Oh, we should probably bring you down and talk to the counselor or the therapist. Like, yeah, okay, good idea. And it's just normal as that. But instead, it's like, everyone suffers in silence. Nobody knows how to ask for help. Nobody knows how to receive the information, because then it's like, well, do you know why people don't ask somebody else, especially a loved one, if they want to kill themselves? The number one reason that people have a hard time asking that question is because they're afraid the answer is going to be yes. And they're like, well, what if they say yes? Well, fantastic. they've just opened up to you. That means that there's some level of trust there and rapport, and then you should know what to do next. And that's the problem, is if you don't know because you haven't been trained, or you don't have any idea of resources, or you don't know what to do, then you feel stuck and exposed. And that's another thing. Human flaw is nobody wants to be embarrassed. Nobody wants to seem that they're, not prepared for a situation. And so if I were to ask someone, do you want to kill yourself? And they say yes. And I'm like, I don't know what to do now. That makes me look stupid. And so like, I don't want to look stupid. So I'm just going to avoid it altogether. And how often does that happen? And this is why, again, I stress this whole like mental health basics in public schools, in college universities, in families, not just, this was another idea I just had, and I'll bring it back to you, Jesse. But we have these parent teacher conferences to bring parents in of kids to like just say, hey, Joe's doing good today, or he's doing his homework, or, he's behind. He hasn't turned in the last couple assignments. He's struggling with this or this. And it's all like grade based or behavior based things. But what if parent teacher conferences were actually like parent child conferences, and we actually had this like family dynamic education session? And we taught parents how to parent. We taught kids how to communicate. We taught parents how to listen. We taught structural skills that could really enhance the family dynamics. Instead of just making it pass, fail, and grade based, what if we actually made it like behavioral, like holistic, wellness, resiliency, self-care, mental health based? I just wonder what that would look like. I have an idea, but that's just my wild ideas I have.
I think it would improve all kinds of things altogether, actually. So great point. So Tiffany is probably one of the best police social workers out there. A very compassionate person and very, very good at her job. And she states that one of the first questions is, have you ever felt like you don't want to be here? That isn't, flat out asking, hey, do you want to die? Right? You're kind of going towards that direction by these things. Another one is a really good hope. A question is about hope. Hopelessness is a very high indicator. So thanks, Tiffany, for that. It does provide a moment of vulnerability where there might be insight, and also provide their vulnerability. And while I know that there's a lot to talk about in this issue, especially that applies to first responders, but we're going to save that for Karen Solomon when we have her on the show, hopefully. This doesn't just apply to the cultural issues attached to this, don't just apply to law enforcement or first responders. They can apply a lot of different places. And one of the reasons why Solution Point Plus exists, and one of the things we do, is we bring this to all organizations. What I often tell people is, in business, you have to provide a need, right? What can you do for me is often the question we get asked. And the challenge here is not everyone understands social science and understands that they even have a need, because they're so unaware of the issue, right? They're not even trained to understand the issue. And what most people will say, right? We talk to an organization, they'll be like, oh, we have an EAP program, right? We have an employee assistance program. We have a wellness program. What does that look like? Well, we have a 800 number, right? We got a website. We contract with people to kind of do this for us. But where is that helping directly? So what you're doing in this case is you're assuming that your employees, because of what they got when they first got hired in HR, were told, hey, you have this benefit, here's the flyer, put it in your folder. You're assuming that the employee will feel like they can reach out and do this. And in some cases they do. It's great that you have one. I'm not saying you shouldn't. What I'm saying, it isn't enough. So leadership theories have come a long way, right? I love that Simon Sinek says that the most important trait a leader has is, there's two. There's empathy, and that they listen, right? So all these leadership theories exist now. There's leadership courses, but are you truly embracing that in your culture? Is it there? So what I argue is, what our organization argues, what Joe says often, is that onus is now on leadership. You have to provide a culture where employees feel safe to seek help, to come and say, hey, I'm not okay. And there has to be a process to getting to those resources that your organization provides, not just saying, hey, call this number whenever you feel like it, because that's not a real expectation. And I honestly think it's bad leadership. And that's what Solution Point Plus does in the private sector as well. Joe?
Yeah, no, and I just saw an article that Chris Cancelosi, one of our great friends and mentors, posted, and he talked about this, about how, organizational culture really needs to understand organizational empathy and what that looks like. And he defined it by three things, and it was transparency, communication, and trust. And those three things coming together, how they equate to organizational empathy. Because again, and I really believe, like, we cannot have an expectation that people, just because they're adults, just because they've reached this arbitrary age, that suddenly they have it figured out, because we've all proven that we don't. And again, every adult, no matter who you are, where you are, we've struggled on some level, somewhere, at some time. And what we know is that oftentimes the way we get through that is based on coping strategies that we've learned or developed. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're not so good. Or it's just something that we just fail through, and we try things, and it's like, that didn't work. Let me try something else. That didn't work. Let me try self-medicating. That didn't work. And we do these things. It's through trial and error, because we haven't been taught how to do it. Right. And this is one of those things where we haven't been taught how to fail. We haven't been taught how to communicate effectively. We haven't been taught how to listen properly, because there is a way to do these things. There's absolutely a right way to do these things, to both communicate, to listen, to empathize, to connect, to validate emotions, to all, there's it's such a simple concept for us because we've been doing it for so long, but we take it for granted. Jesse, I'm reminded of, we were asked to go down to, where was it? Somewhere in the Valley, Laredo, Eagle Pass, and to speak to the school district down there, which is, again, personally, it's like, yes, I so badly want to get into all the schools across America and talk to not just leadership, but the students. But in this instance, we are hired to go down there and talk to 50 guidance counselors from the district. And my assumption right away was like, oh man, they're guidance counselors. Like, these guys are quasi therapists. They have it all figured out. They know what they're doing. They know how to do all these things. And it was still, to this day, one of the best groups that we've ever worked with, because not only were all of my assumptions wrong, but they were so receptive to the information and open to learning and realizing, like, wow, we have not been doing it this way. And like, we can really, really take from what it was you guys just provided right now. Because here's the thing, like, they've been doing this. They've been doing suicide assessments. They've been helping kids who are struggling with depression and not having any training on how to do it. Like, that is unreal to me. But we have so many of these assumptions of the world, of other people. Again, I'll mess up the quote. Sorry, Jess, but there's something about, like, expectations are essentially just, it's a future appointment with disappointment. And so anytime we expect anything of somebody, we're most likely going to be let down. And so just learn to release your expectations, because again, people are going to fall short because we're people. But having this desire to understand or to learn about, like, oh, so wait a minute, just because, think about it from law enforcement, right? Like, just because you're a cop does not mean you have everything figured out. You have very little figured out, but you know how to enforce the law. It's like but people have this unfair expectation that just because you have this uniform and badge, you then suddenly know everything about everything. And it's just not true. And so this is the importance of talking. This is the importance of communicating. This is the importance of doing the work, is seek this information out, but from sources. Like, again, rely on experts that know what they're talking about, that know what they're doing. And I don't know. I feel like, oh, hold on. We got Zach on here, Jesse. Let me see. Zach says peer support programs are not only helpful for peers, but extremely fulfilling for the members of the peer support teams. And here's what I'll say to that, Zach. While I agree with you, we have to be very careful. And we've seen this here in South Texas. When you have a department that has a dedicated peer support team, it's great. When you have a department that has a dedicated peer support team and a family assistance unit or organization, it's great. When you have a department that has a peer support and family assistance and a mental health unit, it's great. The problem is it becomes very confusing. And so now suddenly there's all these resources that, once again, are not educated. It's not conveyed to the end user of what to use when. And so people are turning to, I won't say the wrong organization, but they're turning to organizations where it's like, yeah, but that's not they're not suited for that. So now you're going to have to get passed on to something else. And so we have to think about, and this is why I love David Hicks. And I did a podcast with him. He runs an organization called Tribe CX for customer experience. And he says, hey, develop a system from the end user up, right? So from the consumer up, from the end user, whoever your customer is, develop your program, develop your experience from their point of view backwards, instead of thinking that you know what other people want, because you probably don't. Allow them to tell you what they want and create it from there. And I think this is one of the issues that we have to look at with internally within law enforcement is, hey, if I'm struggling, let me tell you what I think I would do, and then see if we can create something through that. And then you get more people into it, but from the end user perspective, not from just because I sit on the top floor at headquarters, I suddenly know everything that's best, because we know that that's not true oftentimes. And so we just have to be very careful about how we create programs. And then Jesse, you take this one, but she says, Jen Carter says, I wonder how many people commit suicide because of police.
Well, that's a different question, difficult question to unpack. I don't think there's any way that we can, quantify that. I will say that there are many situations where officers are on scene, and for whatever reason, there's a suicidal person and the outcome comes bad. Those are critical incidents. And in some cases, the training isn't standardized across the board, and every element is different, so it's difficult to say. There's also a lot of moving parts involved in a critical incident. Or maybe they had a bad experience and that kind of pushed them over the edge. And I'm sure there's situations also where an officer had that moment, because believe it or not, when people are in crisis, they call the police. When they feel suicidal, they call the police. Joe and I also know that there's officers that may be missing that flag. So Joe talked about the help flag, and then the effort, because they have so many calls to take on, or they're just so busy and maybe they're not trained properly in doing these assessments, they do miss that flag. And then, of course, there is probably one of the most controversial subjects in policing, and that's the suicide by cop scenario. And in a lot of cases, because of the stigma attached to suicide, or because they haven't been able to complete suicide themselves, they may view suicide by cop as a way of going out in a quote unquote blaze of glory. It may be more heroic, maybe more street acceptable, whatever the situation is. So I can see that that's a possibility, that there's several ways to answer that question. But I want to end it with this. And I can say that there has been thousands that I'm aware of suicides that have been prevented because of the police. Joe and I wouldn't even be on here talking to you if there was otherwise. But that's an excellent question, and there's a lot of ways that could be dissected, but it is an important question to ask. So thank you, Jen. And to Zach's point, so Zach is very involved in making things happen in his community. And we know that, one of the things that make us resilient is serving others. So there's extremely gratifying, right? That's kind of twofold. But to Joe's point, right, whenever we make an organization, whenever we make a new unit, we really have to dive into like what the responsibilities are. There's a benefit in an SOP, and of course that's going to develop and change over time as you grow and learn. But there are things to think about, like what is the purview of a peer support? Is your peer support team going to be handling people in crisis, or is it just going to be like a first line of defense, if you will, when someone's going through a problem, or all of the above, right? It's really good if you dial that down before you're in a spot where the person says yes to your suicidality question, and you're like, oh crap, what do I do next? As opposed to if you work it backwards, you have the whole process for you, and the end user perspective is going to be exactly what you want. So really good points. Go ahead, Joe.
No, I just was going to say, Jesse, that Zach also is not just doing great things in his community. He's doing great things in my house from Iowa, because he's like my audio technical guy. And so he consults with me on like, hey man, your camera's 2 frames too high or too low, and you look squatty. And he's very rude in that sense, but I appreciate him also for calling me squatty. Thank you, Zach. No, he's phenomenal. I look forward to working with him more, and he gives us great feedback and insight. So good stuff. Also, I don't know if you guys see it, but right here, because my camera's like thing, but we're proud that again, Milo's a partner. We've talked about this before. But we are super excited about, we're actually going to go through one of their simulators this week, look at their folders, see what they have, and then we're going to write some training for them, which is going to be part of this as well, when we talk about the communication and de-escalation and suicide by cop, like all these different avenues. Again, based on our experience of doing this for a long time, I'm very happy that they're partnering with us, asking for our feedback. And so we're going to start writing training for actually we already started, but we're going to go play with the simulator next week. That way we can have a better idea of where they're at, the direction we're wanting to go with them. And so we're just going to keep them. Oh, Zach is blushing. That's cute. Jen says that may be true, but there are people that reach out, but no one listens and they have no other option. That's also true, Jen. And again, this comes down to here's what I'm not, please, I don't know you personally, but I would ask that you just try and hear me out on this. I'm not excusing or justifying the behavior of police, but this is what I believe. If cops are not trained in this, we shouldn't have an expectation that cops are going to know how to handle it. And that's across the board, right? You like if someone's feeling sad or depressed, you don't go to Walmart and expect that they're going to help you, right? It doesn't equate. It doesn't make sense. If you have a flat tire, you don't go to the veterinary and say like, hey, I have a flat tire, and they're there to work on animals. So one of the sad realities of our country is that because the police have become this de facto responder to all things, and the expectation, again, unfairly has been placed on police, people assume or believe like, well, I only have the option of calling 911. And I'll tell you from the police response on that is, if I don't have training on the call that I'm going to, please remember, most times, neither do you, because you're the one calling the police or first responders. And I don't say that to be harsh, but people who are calling the next level of authority to help them is because that situation has exceeded their ability to handle it. So then, sadly, it goes right from I can't handle this to now I'm going to call the police, who show up with a gun every time. And if they don't know how to handle it, this is where we can see a collision and things go terribly wrong. There should be a buffer. And this is why I've said too, defund, not defund, whatever the movement is. I was asked a question last week on NPR about like, hey, Joe, do you believe that that police should be the only people responding to people in mental health crisis? And my answer is no, I don't. I think that there should be a civilianized force within every community that is non-law enforcement that responds to a vast majority of these behavioral health calls. Because what I know is, while personally I would love to respond to all of them because I'm very comfortable in that environment and I have training and I have over a decade of just saturation in that community. I'm very comfortable in those settings. A lot of officers, especially if they've never had training, they are not comfortable in those situations. And so that's when things can go terribly wrong. And so, yeah, having clinicians go in and respond to that would be much, much smarter. And I think, again, we're seeing that a little bit more and more, but it's a much more complex, deeper issue than that. So again, Jen, I agree with you. Sometimes they are, again, listening is a skill, believe it or not. Listening is a skill. And if someone is feeling depressed or on the verge of suicide and they call police and police show up and they don't listen to them, it's only going to validate the fact that the person is like, see, nobody cares. Nobody likes me. No one sees me. No one takes the time to, I've called the police for help. They showed up. They got mad at me. They handcuffed me. I've heard terrible stories throughout the country of people calling the police for help and they end up handcuffed, going to jail or to a hospital when they were just like, look, I just need help. Like, why are you handcuffing me? Right? Like, I'm a patient. Like, why am I getting handcuffed? And so that's a policy issue. And so we have to make sure that we're looking on both sides. And then let's look at this one, Jesse. Toby says, in relation to the flag, I was listening to a group of young suicide attempt survivors talking, and one of them said something interesting in terms of the flag that Joe mentioned. He said that one mistake his loved ones made was believing him when he said he was fine. His suggestion was to ask questions like, how are you sleeping? When was the last time you ate a meal, etc. Yeah, and those questions, Toby, are exactly what we teach. You're right. Questions of orientation, activities of daily living. When's the last time you showered? How often are you sleeping? When do you sleep? When's the last meal you had? We ask a lot of these in our assessments because, again, I want a bigger picture, not just how are you? I'm fine. Like, fine means a lot of things, and it's not what we think it is. And so anytime someone tells me fine, I immediately dismiss that. And I think, no. Like, let's actually dig a little deeper on this. So great point, Toby. And Jesse, we're coming up on 45, man. So how you feeling? What do you want to cap off with, buddy?
No, this is a great conversation. I like the comments that are coming through. Very good questions. That is true. And the whole defund and fund thing, there's a lot more that has to happen, because unfortunately, whether people are fans of this or not, most states require an emergency hospitalization, require law enforcement to do it. So laws would have to change also. So there's a lot more that goes into this. But Joe's right. It is possible that there's a lot of, well, we know, we've seen it, right? You can see the light bulbs change when we go to an agency and we train them, and they tell you like, hey man, I wish I'd known this before, or like I can think back and every time I missed this, or like I did this in the worst way. So it is likely that people are calling looking for help. They want something done, and that flag is missed because the officers wasn't trained. And it is possible maybe that's not what they were there for, right? It is, mental health call isn't sexy, right? They're not solving crime. They're not stopping crime. They're not catching the quote unquote bad guy. We've also always said that this is highly unsexy as far as law enforcement goes. What we do realize, right, is what you're going to do to switch the culture to change things is you start realizing that it affects us more than anything, right? When you learn that law enforcement officers take their life more than anything else compared to any line of duty death, and we're going to get into that with Karen, that's when you see the surprise in their eyes, and they're like, well, hey, I've struggled with this. And you see that mental health matters more than just understanding the mental health consumer's perspective of dealing with. It's also you. It matters everybody. Then you have them saying, hey, my mom was this, or my brother did this, my wife struggled with this. Hey, if I had known this before, I would have still been married. Mental health affects everyone. And Jen says, I'm Canadian, so maybe I don't belong on here. But even though we don't have a lot of people being shot by police, hey, they dismiss you. It's not like they can't be bothered. Anyway, thanks for listening. Jen, you absolutely belong on here. We appreciate you being on here. While I'm not Canadian, I will say that mental health is a universal thing, and it's a global issue. And how we treat people matters. And it's unfortunate that they don't see people. Criminal justice scholars say that cynicism is the most identifiable and predictable trait of law enforcement. And if we can just switch that to maybe empathy, I think we could go a long way. But we're miles from there, and culture change, I have to believe, is coming. Tommy says, I think instead of defund, they should be saying reallocate and spend more money on training for de-escalation, etc. Although many officers hate the word de-escalation. Yeah, words matter, Tommy. We both know that there's politics to play into all these things that are beyond us, but I think you're absolutely right. Reallocation would probably be more appropriate when they're talking about defunding. Thanks, Karen. Tiffany says, Jen, stay on. So our community welcomes you, Jen. Stay with us. A lot to unpack here. I want to leave you with this, and that's that I am grateful for this avenue, for this media, for your viewership, for your participation, for the likes and shares. I know that Joe and I kind of wing things out week by week. We're just trying to put content in there and talk about things that matter to us. And it's been challenging. And I want to say that each time you watch, each time you share, each time you like, each time you comment, we are hugely grateful. And it tells us to keep going. So thank you. I hope you're going to celebrate today, celebrate this nation, and do so safely. I'm hopeful and prayerful that you and your loved ones are staying safe, and that COVID-19 is eventually curbed, and we can move on from this. And like Joe said, we're halfway through the year, and we got to believe that 2021 is going to be even better. Joe, what you got?
Yeah, thanks, Jesse. And yes, we're more than halfway. So again, I think, when we unite for something good, then we can do amazing things. And I'll just leave you with this again. I'm a huge fan of all things Stoicism. And so a good friend of mine, Marcus Aurelius, says, be happy for this moment, because this moment is your life. And again, remember, oftentimes our feelings are telling us something. Emotions are the language of the subconscious. So if you're feeling wrong, if you're feeling ick, if you're feeling whatever, sit with that. Like, ask where it's coming from. I got my gratitude tattooed. You see that? It says amor fati, which is love your fate. Again, another Stoic saying that really resonated with me. I want to get like 92 more. I'm not sure Jess is going to be okay with that, but I like it. And so anyway, I got this one, my gratitude tattooed. Why not live it, right? Put it on you. Again, guys, we appreciate it. I'm going to sign off for now in this broadcast. Have a great day, and thank you so much.